starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals webinar about the Women's Cycling Project. My name is Kit Keller. I'm Policy Director at APBP, and it's my pleasure today to have Fionnuala Quinn with us, who will make a presentation. Fionnuala has a background as a civil engineer, local advocate, and as a STEM educator. That's science, technology, engineering, and math. In 2015, Fionnuala launched the Bureau of Good Roads, which is dedicated to civic education about good design for our streets and for all users. In her past professional engineering work, Fionnuala focused on the innovative design of safer and more comfortable places to walk and bike, whether by reconfiguring existing streets or through the creation of new facilities. Through the Bureau of Good Roads, Fionnuala brings a fresh approach to making these ideas come alive for youth and community members through workshops, classes, and camps filled with demonstration and hands-on activities. I've had the great pleasure of working with Fionnuala since probably, 2009, and she is really the brains behind the Women's Cycling Project. So with that, Fionnuala, welcome. The presentation is all yours.
Thank you, Kit. I really am delighted to be here today and delighted to have this opportunity. APBP does great work on all sorts of aspects of walking and biking, and I've been lucky enough to be able to contribute on this particular topic over the years. Today I plan to present a brief history about what's taken place around the topic of women and cycling since 2010, mostly as it relates to North America. This is not intended to be a comprehensive history or a detailed acknowledgement of all the great and significant work that has gone on. It's rather intended as a broad brush to show that much work has taken place in many arenas and on many fronts that may not be obvious to those who are not involved or have more than a passing interest in the topic. But a lot has taken place. And just to put it in context, in 2010, APBP put out a survey to gather information about women cycling. This was a project that Kit and I worked on. It wasn't the first survey on the topic, but it seemed to catch the zeitgeist at a particular moment. And the idea for the survey that we put together came from conversations that resulted from a study tour of US representatives who went to Europe to look at walking and biking. Kit was part of that group. And the question that was raised subsequently was, why were rates for women bicycling so relatively low in the US as compared to some of the European cities in the studies? There are cities where more people bike than men in Europe, but in the US, it's generally about 3 times as many men cycling as women. So we put together a survey. It had 37 questions and open-ended responses. We thought we would receive a few hundred responses from members, and instead the survey went viral and we got about 13,000 responses. We organized a few other projects in conjunction with the survey. We started a webinar that we hold most years and a photo contest, and there's a women's cycling project on the APBP website. So the main stated goal at the time was to spark a conversation on this topic. The survey was never intended as a scientific tool, but what was intended to gather information on a range of factors and issues that relate to why women do or don't choose to bicycle, mostly for transportation. Key to our particular ideas was the idea that the design and operation of the built world was playing a role in whether or not women were choosing to bicycle and in their comfort levels using the infrastructure that's available in the US. APBP is an organization that includes many engineers and planners, So as well as the different rates of women cycling in Europe, we could also see that the design of their roadways were rather different to the sort of infrastructure we had in the US. So we were exploring that. However, we did ask questions on all sorts of topics beyond the built world, as we knew this was a complex topic and there were a lot of factors. So we asked 39 questions, many with open-ended responses, and I'll be forever grateful to all the women who supplied long personal responses, because they gave us enormous insights into the topic. And as I said, it was not a scientific survey, but we now had an absolute treasure trove of interesting and useful information. So APBP partnered with the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, to analyze the results. We had so much information. We really had something to work with. And Anna Sibley, who was doing her master's at the time, used some of the questions for her work. And pictured in the slide are the covers of some other analysis and exploration we did of some of the open-ended responses. And there was some other work done on the West Coast. And all of that information is available on the Women's Cycling Project webpage. So we had said we wanted to spark a conversation. And what happened next was amazing. My imagination was limited at the time as to what form that sparking could take. I'll start with the women's cycling forums and summits, because they're one of the most exciting manifestations of the conversation that broke out. The first forum that I recall was here in Washington, D.C., locally organized. There were 9 of us on the panel. We had to move to a larger room at the library, and when we arrived, there was a TV crew reporting about it, and the room was packed. So we were definitely tapping into a topic. So fast forward, a whole lot more organizing, but all sorts of people, and 4 national women's bicycling forums or summits were held, mostly in DC in association with the National Bike Summit, but one on the West Coast. Meanwhile, summits and forums were popping up in different states. Ohio Women's Bicycling Forum springs to mind. Similar events were being organized locally, and they were also now being organized in the UK. And these forums covered wide-ranging topics and confronted all sorts of issues and obstacles related to women riding. They were also reporting on programs and successes, and they were questioning issues about leadership and representation. And by the very act of creating these events, new leaders were being created, and women were being given platforms to speak and express ideas and views that really hadn't been expressed widely before. So there was great excitement at many of these events that I had not experienced at bicycling events previously. There was even a new guide to advise on how to put such an event together. This was put together by the League of American Bicyclists. Despite impressive momentum, the movement to get more women on bikes continued to face many obstacles. These forums were bringing out some of the barriers and overlooked factors to women's cycling that often didn't make it into the conversation previously, and the discussions were now going well beyond safe infrastructure and group rides and biking fashion into new unexplored topics. Locally, new groups were coming together, and I want to acknowledge there were already groups working on this topic, but many new ones were forming, and existing advocacy organizations were adding staff or adding responsibility for this topic to existing staff duties. Here in the Washington, D.C. region, the Washington Area Bicycle Association, WABA, put real resources into a new focused effort, and what they put in place at that time is still going strong and really successful to this day, and has touched thousands of women locally. The same thing that was happening locally was happening on a broader level. The League of American Bicyclists, the national organization representing bicyclists, added staff and resources, and they were actively supporting some of the local efforts. And there were new grant programs for women's groups. Women's programming was quickly rising in prominence, and this included outreach to specific communities that had been underserved in the past. So there was a lot of exciting things happening. These are just a few examples that appeared since 2010. They didn't just happen. As I mentioned, there was support and assistance being made available. On the left is the WABA, Women and Bicycles workbook. This is a primer that is given out to all women who go through their role models program. That was supported through a grant from the League of American Bicyclists. In Philadelphia, there was the Girl Scouts on Wheels patch program and curriculum. There were new toolkits for Spanish-speaking groups and participants. And at the back, there is a report that talks about all of the different programs and efforts that were going on, and that's available on the League's website and is worth checking out. At the same time, all sorts of women-owned business ideas and resources came to the fore. Again, obviously there were always businesses there, but now there were new forums, pop-up shops and spaces for women to promote their businesses under this umbrella of women in cycling. And they were getting support from these other efforts. I'm only showing a snippet here, but Momentum magazine there, which is mentioned, is a great women's-led biking magazine to get a taste of lots more. While the APBP survey was not scientific, there was actual research taking place around North America. And there always had been. It's important to note that people had been working on this topic. But now the big International Transportation Research Conference that's held in Washington, D.C. called TRB, in 2015 it held 2 separate panels on the topic of women and cycling research. When this book, City Cycling, came out, it had a chapter led by leading researchers Jan Gerard, Susan Handy, and Jennifer Dill on the topic specifically of women and cycling. And that chapter is a good read. It discusses the benefits of cycling for women, patterns of participation, and strategies for increasing ridership. So again, lots of great work. Now, critical mass is an effort around family cycling, and it had been born in 2008, which is before the survey, but it seemed to become a leader in the family biking conversation. Critical mass groups were organizing all over the country. We have probably half a dozen in the DC region, and it seemed like it was a natural step for talking about women and bicycling to then get into the issues surrounding transportation for grocery shopping, childcare drop-off, and all the multi-point trips with different cargo that are part of family life. So that is a whole other conversation that really has taken off. The women's biking conversation moved on in many quarters to discussions about equity and a wide range of issues about inclusion and representation. It was a natural extension from the women conversation. It also made important connections between biking and other concepts such as affordable housing, people living near their jobs, etc. There were countless events for every type of bike rider. No longer did it seem that biking was always about how far or how fast you could go, but there were lots of types of events that acknowledged other types of biking and may have been more welcoming to different types of riders. And it's also important to note that since 2010, all sorts of new ways of organizing and welcoming people started to come to the fore. We're now in the age of meetups or Eventbrite or whatever other tool you use. Within all this new organizing, I just want to put a quick spotlight on the phenomena of the closed Facebook Women and Bike pages. This is a listing of the groups that I'm aware of. They are generally organized locally. I believe they are all women only specific, although everyone enforces that differently. Amazing stuff is happening in each of these spaces. I've never seen a comprehensive article written about it, but important conversations are happening there, and many ideas and projects are being born within these groups. And there's much teaching and encouragement around the topic of women and biking. I'll quickly run through some of what also happened at the same time. The biking landscape changed. Innovation is in the air, and there are many more options for changing the streets. There's a new design landscape. We have new standards and guidelines to change our streets, and cities have been taking the lead and many other communities following them. Real change has occurred since 2010 because now we're actually allowed to do things on the streets that were not possible then. So there's a national process afoot there. I'll quickly mention this also. The topic of transportation has become linked to health. You may say, but of course, biking is healthy. But for a long time, transportation was essentially in the hands of engineers who were not charged with considering health issues. But things are really changing there also. There is a backdrop of a wider changing landscape in transportation. The entire transportation conversation is changing and is actually turning on its head. And there are many unknowns right now in transportation. We have also changed our understanding of certain things. Bike share, mapping, and data have all changed a lot about how we think about how we do things, how we share information, how we use data. Bike share, we now knew who was on the bike. We knew where the start and end was of their trip. That was a whole new concept. And data has now become a real commodity, and that did not seem to be at the fore in 2010. So with all that, I hope I've expressed that it does feel like a different world to the one where we launched the 2010 Women's Cycling Survey. And if you look at the data about women and cycling, you know, the rate of participation in the US, and I will say the data, there isn't a lot of great data on that topic, but the needle hasn't shifted much for the rates of women cycling in the US. However, when I'm in a place like downtown DC, I feel like I am catching a glimpse of the future because there are so many women biking on the streets of DC where we do have new infrastructure, where we do have those programs. So for many, bicycling may still not be a very viable option, but I want to suggest that a lot has changed, a lot has been put in place in the last few years that may prime the pump for changes like we're seeing on the streets of DC to happen in other communities. There are a lot of new tools and ideas and means of organizing and information and changes in rules that are really allowing things to happen. With all that's happened between 2010 and 2016, we are back with a new survey. The 2010 survey was just a starting point, and we gathered a wealth of information and we got invaluable insights. It was one element that helped lay the groundwork for the current work that's taken place all over. We have written the new survey. It'll open on April 19th. We've dropped many of the original questions. We no longer need to ask them, which is a great thing because others have taken on those topics. We're going back to the big question, which is how can we get more women biking? And we want to see if we can capture some of the changed thinking since 2010. So we hope you will spread the word about the survey. We will be holding a webinar. We have some fantastic speakers who will be talking about different parts of educating in relation to biking, and there'll be more information available about that soon. And that's where we are right now. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Fionnuala. That was fantastic. And it really gives us an opportunity to see where we've been and where we're going. The survey, it was exciting, as you mentioned, that a few other universities or individuals doing bike studies use the data. Some of it we were able to help them utilize it on a local level. So we're hoping, since we're gathering zip code or mail code, postal code information, we're hoping that we can refine and help people winnow out data that is helpful to them at the local level as well. So I had a question for you about bike share, and then I welcome questions from the audience today. We'll get to as many as we can, so feel free to post your questions for Fionnuala in the question box. Fionnuala, have you seen any data about the use of bike share by women?
Yes. I can direct you to that data.
Okay.
That was one of the things that bike share allowed, and was one of the first topics that people started looking at. I know they are able to show differences between day memberships and annual members, and they're able to show differences in the types of trips and lengths of trips taken. That's something I could certainly dig out. But you see, that was the beauty of the new system, is you can ask those questions now, and also people started asking those questions.
Excellent. How about university campuses? What kind of developments are we seeing there?
That I'm less familiar with it. I mean, university campuses are very interesting in terms of bicycling because they are campuses, but they are also, unlike cities, the population changes all the time. So there's an element of kind of starting again in certain parts of teaching, etc. But that's certainly a great frontier in terms of cycling. And there's a lot of great work being done on on master plans for campuses, and also other types of bike share systems on campuses that are different to some of the city systems.
We've seen some of the women's bike summits popping up on university campuses as well, so that's really good. It's again a great way to start a conversation. Another question I had is the specialty rides, the types of rides that are more fun oriented or sometimes even have an element of costumes. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the Washington, D.C. area and how women are getting involved in those special rides?
Well, I have one of my own that I run every year on June 16th. I run the Bloomsday ride, which is great fun. I have proven one can bicycle in full-length silk dresses. There are tweed rides. There's a lot more, and a lot of this happens through the Women in Bicycles Facebook page. There's a lot more biking, we're biking for cupcakes, or we're biking for, something fun. People often, they want to get together, they want to do something fun, and we have all sorts of themes around biking now. The dress up are just one part of that. We have tweed rides. But yeah, there just seems to be a lot more fun reasons to bike with other people. Again, that also relates back to the fact that it's easier to organize now. We have a lot more tools for organizing, and people can step forward. We have biking and history rides. We have, and someone can take the initiative to set that up, do it themselves, and then they have a ride around some sort of theme.
You mentioned critical mass rides. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, again, they've been fantastic. They're very important around here. These are family-oriented rides. Frequently, because of the nature of riding with small children, the equipment is different. So actually, the people using that type of equipment like to get together with other people to talk about, details about, baby seats, and then the baby outgrows that. What do I use next? And how do you like that? Do you prefer having the cargo at the front or the back? They also, because those rides are inclined to be short, you're not going to ride 30 miles across the city with, your 4-year-old. So they pop up locally. That's why we have so many around here. We have the Arlington Kidical Mass, the DC Kidical Mass. They're all friends, of course, and they come together for different things. And we have in DC an event annually called the ABCs of Family Biking, which was organized by the leaders of Kidical Mass. This is all volunteers I'm talking about, of course. And that is a very large event which they've done in conjunction with the Department of Transportation. And there they bring everybody together to do demonstrations, show the equipment, run little bike rodeos, have safe routes to school, social side, safety information, just a wonderful event because, again, people want to share information, buy equipment, learn from other members of the community, and, just to enjoy biking from their perspective.
And biking is really mostly fun. It's a great way to get from point A to point B, but I always enjoy the journey when I'm on a bike heading to the post office or the library or the grocery store. It's great. Tell us a bit more about the survey. It's going to be open, according to your slide, it'll be open on April the 19th. How will people be able to access that?
We will be putting information out about the survey through various channels. All the new sort of social media channels, Twitter, APBP, Facebook, through national organizations, through those closed Facebook groups I mentioned. We'll be asking people to share through their social media channels. It will also be going to other types of national organizations. I mentioned, the role of the new, of the health organizations. So organizations such as that will be involved. And that's another thing, since 2010, we've made links to those organizations because transportation has become a much bigger issue in the conversations around health. So we'll be putting it out in many different ways. Back in 2010, when we put this out, amazingly, we didn't use most of those channels. We weren't talking about social media. It basically went out through chains of emails in 2010. But now we've got new ways to push, to let people know about the survey. So we'll be hoping that other people will help us spread the word, but we'll be making sure that it goes to a wide range of organizations.
Great. Well, thank you. And we're looking forward to the webinar on the May 12th. Our speakers will include Fionnuala Quinn. She'll be back to speak about the survey, give us a brief update. And Suzanne Forup, who is head of development Scotland for Cycling UK. Nicole Friedman, who is chief of active transportation and partnerships with the City of Seattle and also the president of the North American Bike Share Association. Miriam Kenyon, who is Director of Health and Physical Education for the District of Columbia Public Schools. And last but not least, Angela Vanderkloof, she's with MobiCon, Concordis Group, and she is the Sustainable Mobility Consultant. And she'll be talking about her experience teaching women who have immigrated to the Netherlands to bike, to be part of the culture there. So Fionnuala, with that, I think I'll go ahead and close the webinar today. And thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent.
Great. Thank you, Kat.
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.